We talk a lot about college readiness, but here's the hard truth. We're sending students to college campuses every year who can win a verbal debate or excel in a class discussion, only to hand in an essay that reads like it was written by a completely different person, typically a way less impressive person. That gap between what students know and what they can demonstrate in writing is exactly what today's guest has dedicated her career to closing. Natalie Wexler, author of The Knowledge Gap and co-author of The Writing Revolution 2.0, joins us to explain why writing instruction has been systematically deprioritized, what it's costing our students, and how the best teachers refuse to let writing become the thing that falls through the cracks. My name is Philip Bates. I am your host of From Classroom to Campus, and I've got the wonderful Megan Blessing here, our producer. She's going to follow along during the interview, take some copious, wonderful notes, and probably ask us some great questions at the end.
You betcha. I don't know why I said that.
All right. Well, Natalie, we're going to jump in. Thank you for being here again. We're super excited to have you. We're going to start with kind of some lightning questions. Okay. So lightning round questions. Question number one, 5-paragraph essay, still useful, or is it time to retire it?
Still useful for the majority of students. Not that that's where they're going to end, but for many students, they need some structure to get a good start.
Yeah. Awesome. Outline first or just start writing?
Outline first. It is a great way to modulate the heavy cognitive load that writing imposes if you can offload some of that stuff to a clear linear outline.
Is writing ability something students are born with, or is it something that's purely taught?
I'd say it's a combination, but I think we underestimate how much it can be taught. And I think, again, for the majority of students, you need to teach it, and they can be turned into maybe not, Ernest Hemingway or F. Scott Fitzgerald, but people who can actually write clearly and coherently.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading something recently, and, if you read an old letter that was written, maybe 50, 60 years ago, and it's written so eloquently and it's so beautiful. And, I kind of did a deep dive on how people used to write these amazing letters. Like you read these World War II letters and all these amazing letters from really 100 years ago. And it's because people sat down and worked on their correspondence and worked on writing a great letter. And I think that's why, I don't know, at least for me, when I read things like that from the past, I do feel like the ability to articulate was so much stronger. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I used to be a historian. I've spent a lot of time reading old letters, so I know what you mean.
It's amazing. Okay, so grade the writing or grade the thinking?
Well, those things are really hard to separate. If I think ideally you do enough groundwork in preparing kids to write at length that by the time they hand in an essay, you can see through the writing to the thinking. And in addition, when you teach kids to write in more complex ways, it enables them to think in more complex ways. So by teaching writing, you actually are teaching thinking.
Yeah, awesome. We'll get into. I've got a couple more questions later on about kind of how teachers can effectively give feedback to students, because I think that's absolutely one of the things that teachers struggle with the most is how to give effective feedback. So. All right. Well, through the lightning round, here we go. You've spent years and years studying, how writing gets taught. I mean, I would say you've committed, your career from writing perspective in that regard. And before we kind of dive into big solutions, for our audience, what I'd love for you to start with is, through your conversations with teachers, through your observations, where is the writing landscape right now?
Well, I should start with the caveat that I don't actually interact with teachers that much about their writing, and I have not had that much firsthand opportunity to observe teachers teaching writing. But my co-author of the Writing Revolution book, Judy Hockman, is a veteran teacher, and a lot of my information comes from her and from other people at the Writing Revolution organization. But I would say there has been a general impression that you don't really need to teach writing. Teachers don't get good training in teaching writing. Judy Hockman's says that she was taught when to assign writing, but not how to teach writing. And I think that is still largely the case. We have kind of expected kids to pick it up. If they just read enough and write enough, they'll just sort of naturally become good writers. But for most kids, it really doesn't work that way. And we've kind of moved away from that with reading. There's a lot of attention on teaching kids to read, much, much less attention on teaching them to write, which doesn't really make sense because writing is actually a lot harder than reading. You can be a good reader and not a good writer, but it's very rare to find a good writer who is not also a good reader.
Absolutely. So do you think the trend's gotten worse over the years?
I'd say, yeah, in some ways. I don't think we ever did a great job of teaching writing, but I'd say for the last, 30 years or so, this idea that it doesn't make sense to even try to teach writing has kind of taken hold, especially at the elementary level, that kids should just write freely, find their writerly voice, express themselves, don't worry too much about teaching grammar conventions, organization of thoughts, all of those things, and certainly not writing at the sentence level. That has been really overlooked. And I think in the past, there was much more emphasis, say 40 years ago, 50 years ago, certainly when I was in school. My mother apparently saved every piece of homework I ever did when I was 10 years old. I've had a real time travel experience back to many years ago, and there was much more emphasis. I was diagramming sentences and all of that. And so we used to do that with kids, parts of speech, et cetera. The problem with that is that for most kids, studies have shown it really doesn't carry over to their writing. I mean, they might be able to recite the definition of a complete sentence, but they're still writing in incomplete sentences. So I think that worked for some kids, probably the ones who were going to learn to write pretty much no matter what you did. But for most kids, that really was not adequate either. So what we need to do is we do need to teach grammar conventions of written language. But for most kids, the only way that's going to work is if we teach that more functionally through writing itself, rather than as things to memorize, parts of speech, et cetera.
I've heard you speak about it where, social studies is such an amazing opportunity for students to become better readers and to learn so much more vocabulary. And when I was an elementary principal and we were very focused on standardized testing, social studies was the very first subject to fall by the wayside.
You're not alone.
I look back on it and I hated it because we could have done such a better job of teaching social studies and integrating that in. And I think students would have become, better readers, therefore better writers and that sort of thing with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's been a huge, huge problem.
So let's talk about at the university level, where teachers, really start to become teachers. Do you feel like we're doing a disservice in teacher school by not teaching teachers how to teach writing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because it's not just that kids do need to learn to write. I mean, even in the age of AI, I think that's really, really important, and we can talk about that. But one reason it's important is that writing is such a powerful lever for learning if you teach it in a manageable way. And so if prospective teachers were taught effective techniques for teaching writing, it would enable them and their students to be more successful, not just at writing, but at learning in general.
Obviously, it's foundational things that students, need to learn in elementary school. Hugely important. Well, now let's get them into high school, and they've missed out on those things. They've missed out on some of the critical writing instruction they should have had. Do you have advice or things that high school teachers should do to catch them up?
Well, absolutely, because there are not that many things that really work at the high school level to catch kids up if they're missing a lot of the knowledge and skills you wish they'd acquired earlier. Writing instruction is, I think, one of the few approaches that can be really effective, maybe in addition to, intensive tutoring, and that's hard to scale up. But, writing instruction, I've seen this happen at the high school level, and it's easier if you start earlier, but high school is not too late. And what it can do is writing instruction, if it's done in a manageable way, ideally beginning at the sentence level. And, kids don't automatically know how to construct sentences just because they're in like 10th or 11th grade. So whatever grade level they're at, if they need to learn about how to construct sentences, that's where it should begin. But when you embed explicit writing instruction in whatever content kids are learning, it makes that new information stickier, even if they don't have a framework to fit it into. But writing about it helps that information stick in long-term memory, and it deepens comprehension because it really requires kids to think about what they're writing. If the instruction is done in a well-structured way, it requires kids to make connections between bits of information they may have floating around in long-term memory, figure out causal relationships and what's more important. One item of information is more important than another and why. Now, all of this does need to be taught explicitly or it becomes cognitively overwhelming, but that's the potential of writing. Plus, a huge barrier to comprehension, not just in English language arts, but across the board, is the complex syntax of written language, sentence structure. And a great way to enable kids to understand that kind of syntax in written text is to teach them how to use it in their own writing. If you teach them how to use a subordinating conjunction or an appositive, which is a phrase describing a noun, they're in a much better position to understand that kind of sentence structure when they encounter it in text.
Every day, educators work tirelessly to keep high school students motivated. But despite their best efforts, too many students still feel lost in a system that doesn't always support their success. At UWorld, we believe education is about unlocking a future full of possibilities. That's why our team of educators created teaching and learning tools for the advanced placement exams. Powerful, easy-to-use resources that help students master even the most challenging concepts. Content that features dynamic visuals created by world-class artists and interactive elements that spark curiosity and a love for learning. Our mission is to help every student reach their full potential. Whether that means earning valuable college credit by excelling on AP exams or achieving their dream SAT score, UWorld is here every step of the way. Every day, across the country, students are using UWorld to turn their aspirations into reality. Discover how UWorld can help your students succeed. Visit collegereadiness.uworld.com to learn more. At UWorld, we work with AP teachers across the nation. Many of them are not teaching AP Lang and AP Lit. They're teaching AP Calculus and AP Biology and AP, microeconomics. For those teachers who are not English teachers and maybe don't have a background in teaching, writing, what advice do you have for them? What guidance would you have for them?
Well, I would say you may not be, having your kids write essays in math class or calculus or science, whatever, but bringing writing activities, sentence level writing activities, maybe into whatever subject you're teaching is going to actually make your instruction more powerful because it is going to require kids to grapple with the concepts and put them in their own words, which is a very powerful boost to learning. So, I don't know about AP content, but there's definitely are examples of activities from the writing revolution embedded in math and science content in the book. For example, let's say you're teaching kids about subordinating conjunctions, and this wouldn't be going on in an AP math class, but let's say you're also teaching them about decimals and fractions. You could have them do a sentence level activity where you give them the sentence stem, although fractions are like decimals, comma, and they need to supply the rest of that sentence. Yes. And that really requires them to figure out what is it that's different about those two things? And that can be applied in any context.
To me, it's so simple and so wonderful that you, your team, I'm not sure exactly who came up with it, but the because, but, so strategy, right. I love. Could you walk folks through the because, but, so strategy and why it's so important? And
I do want to make it clear that, I didn't create this method. So I can say it's brilliant, right? Because I do want to give credit where credit is due, and that's Judy Hockman and the people at the Writing Revolution organization. But because But So has become maybe the best known writing activity, and it's simple but brilliant. So it consists of giving students a sentence stem. Now, when you probably you don't need to do this with high school students, but when you introduce a new grammatical concept, you want to do it in the context of familiar content. So if you were doing this with, second or third graders who maybe aren't that familiar with those conjunctions, you'd start with maybe a holiday or something they know about. But let's say you're teaching about ancient India, for example, and you also want to teach them how to use these conjunctions, and you want to, get them to think about the content they're learning about. So they've learned something about ancient India, and then you give them the sentence stem. The Indus River was helpful to the people of Mohenjo-Daro because, and then the same sentence stem with but, and the same stem with so. And each of those conjunctions requires students to retrieve a different kind of information from long-term memory and put it in their own words, which is a form of retrieval practice that really makes it easier for them to, in the future, when they need that information, it's going to make it easier for them to retrieve. But they all ask for different relationships. So because is asking for a reason why, because it gave them water to grow crops. But is more difficult because it's asking for contrasting information, but it often flooded their houses. And that is laying the groundwork for and laying the groundwork for argumentative essays ultimately. Yeah. And then so is asking for a cause and effect relationship, so they prayed to it. It's not the same cause and effect relationship as because. So it's a simple but extremely powerful activity that can be embedded in pretty much any content. And as Judy Hockman likes to say, the rigor depends on the content. You can do this. I have an example embedding it in a question of, a sentence stem about the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant believed that space and time were objective aspects of human reality. But, that's not a simple exercise. You better understand the philosophy of Immanuel Kant in order to complete that sentence stem. So this is good for students at any level, including high school and beyond.
Yeah. And I think it's a great, like we said, simple, brilliant strategy. And something a high school student, a college professor, anybody could implement and help students get to that critical thinking level, which is really what writing demands. I mean, writing demands critical thinking.
Absolutely.
And so good segue into a little quick AI discussion, if you will. AI, I think, is in a position right now where it is unnecessarily stripping students of critical thinking. Not on purpose, it's AI. It doesn't think for itself in that regard. But my biggest worry with AI with writing is, to be effective in writing, you've got to critically think. And when you have somebody else do that critical thinking for you, it's just like a muscle. Brain's a muscle in that regard. So I'd love to, get your take on AI and that critical thinking connection.
Yeah, I mean, it's partly critical thinking. It's partly just retaining the information. I mean, there have been studies where people who've used AI to help them write, they don't remember what was in what they quote unquote produced because they didn't write it. So they can't can't quote it back to you. They can't do anything with it. But as I've been saying, that writing is potentially a really powerful way of acquiring and deepening knowledge. So if you subcontract out that process, even the process of creating an outline of an essay, you're actually subcontracting out a large part of the learning. You're not getting those cognitive benefits from the writing. And ultimately, if the problem is it's very seductive, right? I mean, it's so much easier. I think it would help if we spent more time explicitly teaching kids how to write so it's not so overwhelmingly difficult for them. And that would maybe help lessen the temptation to just rely on AI. But it's, almost inevitable. It's going to be just almost impossible to resist that temptation. And kids, I think, often understand that they're cheating themselves out of some learning. I mean, I've seen quotations from kids saying that. But, a lot of them are going to be worried. Well, my peers, they're using AI. They're going to be handing in much more polished essays than what I can produce. And so it's very hard, not to do it. I think we really need a systemic response to this rather than just leaving it to individual teachers and students.
Yeah. Yeah, you made like 87 good points right there. I think the first thing is I love hearing the word seductive with writing. I think that's wonderful how you put that together. Second thing that I loved is, for students in AI, students are so self-conscious, specifically as they get into junior high and high school. And AI does allow them not to be wrong in their mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's really a big challenge we have. Writing, reading for that matter too, is really all about productive struggle and learning through it. You write a sentence, you have it revised, you write a better sentence. You have it revised, you write a better sentence. It's constantly about failing and moving forward. And I think society, lots of different things are pushing against it being okay to be wrong and it being okay to productively struggle. I think we take that struggle away from students too much.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a college professor who I've talked to quite a few college professors who know that students are using AI. They can tell, but it's such a bureaucratic hassle to do anything about it that a lot of them are just. But this one professor I spoke with, she could see she had given a definition of a concept from philosophy that was sort of her own take on it, but she could see that the student had handed a paper where he'd used AI to provide a much more standard definition. And she said to him, like, why did you do this? And he said, well, I thought it didn't sound right, but I trusted the AI. I thought the AI must know better than I do.
Well, and I think adults see it in the workplace a lot of times. The individuals who are using AI effectively are the ones who have the expertise and can look at what AI gives you and make a determination of, okay, this is great, but this is not right.
That's right. And the only way you get to that level of expertise, though, is to do the cognitive work yourself. So,
amen.
We're
Absolutely.
going to have a pipeline problem,
Yes. No, you're spot on. It's the stuff that I worry about too, and I know educators worry about. So another point you made a second ago about school districts, buildings, school boards. I do feel like there is a lack of AI policy out there or AI standards. I think people make excuses about that. Well, AI is changing so fast. By the time we made a policy, it'd be out of date. I think that's just a kind of a BS excuse. If you were working with a school board or working with a district to create an AI policy around writing, a tough question, what would you do?
Well, I would certainly put it off limits, really, for kids below a certain grade level,
Sure.
below high school. But even in high school, I guess where it could be useful is to ask questions of kids rather than giving them the answers. Could you reword that sentence is not clear? Can you reword that so that, there are various ways to structure AI so that it's not just giving kids the answers, but it's actually guiding them through a process of thinking. The problem is that if you just leave it up to kids to use AI that way, they're probably not going to, it makes it harder, right? If you just have to keep answering these questions rather than getting the answers. So somehow it's going to have to be supervised or structured, or guardrails will need to be put up in a way that and prevents kids from using it just as a shortcut so that they don't have to actually do the hard cognitive work. And it's not a criticism of students. I mean, we're just human beings. That's the way we operate. We don't want to do hard work unless we have to, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think the guardrail thing is huge. I think the temptation right now in the draw is just so strong that unless you have those strong guardrails, unless you have those, frankly, expectations on top of accountability, we're going to have to get there, or you're going to continue to see that gap increase. Really because of AI, when it should be doing the opposite. It should help enhance our writing. It should make us more productive. It should do all these things that in a lot of places it does. But for students, for children, it certainly is a scary place right now in terms of education and AI, I think.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, I've seen like high school teachers quoted as saying, well, I will just, I'll have kids just use the AI to help them get started, like with an outline. But
Yeah.
even creating an outline, even brainstorming, I mean, brainstorming, maybe it's less of a risk, but creating an outline is itself a really demanding cognitive task during
Correct.
which a lot of learning actually occurs. So I would not allow it for that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more because I feel like, anytime anybody sits down to write, that outline is the framework for everything they're going to write.
Yeah.
And if you have not personally come up with that, is it really your work in general?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's
And there's a lot of emphasis in the Writing Revolution method on explicitly teaching students how to create clear linear outlines for paragraphs
Mhm.
and essays. And one of the points that Judy Hockman had made, and it's totally true, is there's even if you never turn that outline into a finished piece of writing, you've really deepened your comprehension and increased your retention of whatever it is you created the outline about.
Yeah, I love that. So we'll shift a little bit because I could talk about AI and all this stuff for a long time. Let's talk about feedback. I think personally, one of the things that high school teachers in particular struggle with is with feedback. And I think they struggle with feedback for a couple reasons. I think number one, it takes time. And teaching is really, I think at this point, specifically for AP teachers that have a lot of content to teach in a short amount of time, I think the time element scares them. And then I think the other element hurts them they struggle with because being critical of a student and doing it in a way that doesn't shut that student down and also providing them with support and feedback that actually makes them a better writer is tricky.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's especially tricky if you're dealing with, a 5-page essay. That's like, where do you begin? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's all sorts of things that you could comment on. And you don't want to hand it back with covered in red ink or whatever the modern equivalent is. Um, and I think the writing revolution approach would be to lay a lot of groundwork before you expect students to hand in a completed essay so that a lot of the feedback you're giving comes before they reach that point. And it'll start maybe depending on the student's needs or ability level, you might be starting with sentence level activities, which is much more manageable to give feedback on that, both in terms of the ideas and the writing. And then before students write an essay, you would teach them how to construct the outline and review that outline and give feedback on the outline so that you can, if they're going off in a direction that does not make sense, you can nip that in the bud. And that's going to be much less discouraging for the student than if they've spent hours creating this essay and then you tell them, oh, you went off on the wrong track. So, sort of going slow to go fast is what is needed. And then by the time the essay is turned in, it shouldn't be a big surprise to anyone because that groundwork will have been laid.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I think what you're saying is, systematically providing feedback throughout that writing task. From the outline level to building a thesis level to actually starting, whatever that writing piece is going to be. And by providing feedback, then it's spoon feeding. It's small chunks and rather than just like, hey, here's a full essay,
Right.
give them all this feedback. When really there's so many things potentially wrong, they would need to go all the way back to that outline part.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you mentioned chunks. I mean, that is, so there's a concept known as deliberate practice in cognitive science, which could be applied to any complex skill. And that would include writing. But essentially, the teacher needs to break up the complex process into manageable chunks and then give the student instruction, whatever chunk they need, and then lots of prompt targeted feedback, and then move on to the next chunk that they need, once they've gotten the idea of the first chunk. So yeah, that is exactly what needs to happen.
So you've got your high school teacher and they are not teaching language arts. They are teaching another subject area. Obviously, they need to, embed writing into their instruction. they've got 20 minutes. What's an activity, what's something they could do in 20 minutes that would benefit their students from writing perspective?
So, I mean, sometimes you're going to have to spend 20 minutes like just on writing, but I'd like to get away from the idea that that's the only time writing will be taught, because really it's going to be much more powerful if you weave it into instruction generally. So you might start the class with a sentence level activity that requires kids to recall what they learned yesterday or the week before, or maybe even farther back than that. And that's a great retrieval practice activity. And then you might, in the middle of, it depends on the class. Let's say it's history or economics or something, not calculus, but you might say, okay, what if we just pause to draft like an outline for a paragraph about what we've been talking about? Like what would the topic sentence be? What are some details that we've talked to that relate to that topic sentence? So you could, that's that's going to take a little bit longer. Then at the end of class, you could have an exit ticket kind of activity, maybe another sentence level activity, sentence expansion. There's lots of them besides because, but, and so, that is structured enough so that it's not just an open-ended question, which is often going to be less powerful than something that provides those kinds of guardrails so that you're focusing students' attention on what you want them to think about. And then, depending again on the subject matter, you may need to have them, especially in the age of AI, draft an essay in class, or something like that, depending on the subject.
Sure.
But I think we've seen writing as something that, it's kind of separate from content area instruction. And it's really not, because everything we can express when we write draws on what we're able to learn. And writing is a way of learning. So we need to break down those artificial walls we've erected between writing and any content area.
Yeah. True integration of writing instruction. Yeah. So let me ask you this. We talk a lot about college readiness in students being college ready. What does a college ready writer look like to you?
Well, ideally, a college ready writer would certainly know how to construct sentences in various ways, complex ways, and also have learned how to create outlines so that they're, before they start writing, they've got a plan. They don't have to hold all of that in working memory, like, what was I going to say next? And even I've been writing a lot for many years. There are times when I don't need an outline, when I pretty much know, what I'm going to say. But I often need to construct an outline I might not stick with it, completely faithfully, but it's really helpful to have some kind of roadmap before you start writing. So ideally, they would have all of that under their belts by the time they get to college, and know, there's a lot of stuff in there. So just to create even an outline for a paragraph, knowing what distinguishes a topic sentence from, say, a detail sentence, that requires the ability to generalize. It's really a very sophisticated process. And we just kind of expect kids, we say, well, we'll just put the important stuff in that first sentence, but they may not know what the important stuff is. So all of these things need to be taught explicitly, sometimes over a period of years, before kids could be really expected to do them well independently.
Sure. Teachers are listening to this, or will listen to this, and they're going, oh my gosh, I love everything Natalie's telling me, but I'm still not confident. I'm still not sure. I still want to learn more about these things. What is the teacher who really wants to get better at teaching writing and embedding that into their instruction? What should they do?
Well, I certainly would recommend reading the Writing Revolution book. There's now a second edition that is more user-friendly. It's designed for third grade and up, so it goes up through 12th grade. There are examples for different sort of levels of ability, and we didn't use grade levels because, you might have somebody in high school who's still at a level 1. But there are examples adapted to various grade levels, various subject matters. And then if you want to take it to the next level, I really recommend taking one of the online courses offered by the Writing Revolution organization. But I mean, and I'm sure there are other good methods of writing instruction out there, but this is the one I'm familiar with, and I've seen it work. So it's certainly the one that I would recommend.
Yeah. All right, Megan, you've been taking notes over there. You've been listening intently. What you got for Natalie?
Let's do a because but so.
Oh, geez.
Okay. Teachers avoid explicit writing instruction, ...
Because no one has taught them how to teach in that way. I would say, if I can do another because they may have been led to believe it's not necessary, but it's really necessary in order to enable most students not only to become good writers, but also good learners and good thinkers. So we need to enable all teachers to integrate explicit writing instruction into their teaching across the curriculum.
Thank you, Natalie.
Easier to construct that sentence than to make it happen. But
no, absolutely. Yeah. But it starts with the themes, and it starts with the mindset of this is what needs to happen. I mean, you're right. The complexity of making it happen is hard, but it's the commitment that it's got to start with.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, I hope it helps to make the point that it's not just about writing. It is about learning.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've got to have you back. And the next time I have you back, I want to talk about reading. Because there's so much to talk about with reading too. And then maybe we can tie it together with writing and do a whole nother episode, because you're so wonderful to talk to and so interesting. And I just have really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. And those two things are very closely linked, reading and writing. Yeah. They're not taught that way usually, but they are. So sure, I'd be happy to come back.
And Megan, wonderful questions as always.
Thank you.
So Natalie, tell everybody where they can find you, if they're more interested in learning about anything that we've talked about.
Well, probably the best thing to do is just go to my website, nataliewexler.com, and there's information there about the books, and also a way you could subscribe to. I have a free Substack newsletter called Minding the Gap. And there's some information about a couple of podcasts I have co-hosted. Yeah. So if people are into listening, then they can check that out.
So Minding the Gap is a fantastic resource. I mean, awesome. And I love it's the London subway, the tunnel, the tube, I should say, the tube. So where did that come from? Where'd you grab the tube logo?
I found it online. I
didn't know if there was any London or England connection or something like that.
I thought there are other things out there called Minding the Gap or Mind the Gap, but to me, it's the knowledge gap and the idea of minding cognitive science. So seemed to make sense.
Yeah, that's a great resource. Well, Natalie, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us today. Big thank you to Zach, big thank you to Megan, and a huge thank you to Natalie for being on the episode. We can't wait to get Natalie back on. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hey, subscribe, share it with your teaching friends. Spread the word on these great things that Natalie, had to say, and hopefully she inspired you as much as she inspired me today. Remember, life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. Have a fantastic day, everybody. The opinions expressed by our guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views from Classroom to Campus, UWorld, or its affiliates. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. That really helps us out. Thank you so much.